G'day and welcome to this week's video. My name's Robert Gowdy and this week we're going to consider whether a self-managed superannuation fund always has to be the answer. Now I think we know from what we've seen come out of ASIC over the last and the ATO over the last 2 or 3 years is they don't want cookie cutter advice. They don't want people saying self-managed super fund is for you in all circumstances. They are complex animals and they want the right people with the right understanding and the right motives to go into a self-managed superannuation fund. So we'll go through and obviously consider why you may want to use one, and whether it's appropriate, and look at the alternatives. Does it always have to be a self-managed superannuation fund? So why would you use one? Well, the strategy door swings wide open in terms of investment. Obviously there's superannuation restrictions on what you can invest into and who you can buy assets off or sell assets to, but there's plenty of option. If you intend on owning a direct property, a land, farming land that you may already own, and you want to put it in there for farm succession or for tax planning purposes, self-managed super fund is really your only option there to get those type of unique assets into a superannuation environment. It can provide people with the control over their assets that they desire. Like myself, as been a business owner for over 20 years. Other business owners, they tend to like control. They like to know where their money is, where it's invested, and they like to have control over what happens, or at least be part of the conversation. So a self-managed superannuation fund can provide that. And depending on the way that you invest, you can have direct ownership over the asset. So your self-managed super fund, the entity has direct ownership of the asset, and there's no custodial arrangements. No one sitting in between you and your assets. And so that's something I explain to my clients when we set up these structures, that if we like Microsoft and you've got your self-managed super fund, your fund itself will own it directly. So I can go broke, my business can go broke, but Microsoft is held directly by your entity. No one sits in between. And I think that's an important point. And there was a point that was highlighted to me during the GFC when certain businesses in the advice sector went bankrupt and they dragged a lot of clients down with them. There was debt involved with those, so but that direct ownership I feel is very important. You can reduce fees when compared to other alternatives, and that's something that we've done for probably the last 15 years, comparing to some of the retail areas. A self-managed super fund, when going directly, you can save fees. Self-managed super funds can be complex, and this is where the ATO, ASIC, they don't want cookie cutter advice. They don't want everyone to be shoved into the one structure, because that's the business model. So running a self-managed super fund obviously comes with the responsibility of being trustee. So all members must be trustees, and all trustees members, so they're responsible for their own retirement assets. But there's a lot of rules, a lot of superannuation rules to understand and to have your head around. And I've often compared it to like running a small business. You have to have your paperwork spot on. You have to have an understanding of how the system works and keep the bookwork right. And if you set one up and you're not getting investment advice from somewhere, well, you're responsible for all the decisions with regards to where you invest, what assets you purchase, and why. And all this takes a lot of time. So it's like running a small business. So, but are there alternatives, which is obviously the point of this video, and the answer to that is yes, there is. I think there's some very valid options out there for people to use. Technology is improved. The investment platforms can offer what most people need, in my view, without having the responsibility of being the trustee with the risk that you take on. There's certain government protections that, as a trustee, is afforded to retail and industry fund members that are not there for self-managed superannuation funds. So it's important to know that. So a lot of these platforms, they're not investment products, they're just technology platforms that allow you to transact and to track the investments under a superannuation trustee. So a lot of the ones we've looked at recently and that we're actively using, that you can not only purchase direct Aussie equities, you can also buy direct international shares, which I think is an important thing to do. The one thing they can't do is own the direct property. That's one area that they fail. They just can't handle that because it's a unique asset. There's leases set up. It just doesn't fit the mode of scalability. You just can't scale that up where there's unique assets doing unique things. Some of the names in this space: Hub24, Net Wealth, BT. There's plenty of other wrap providers out there. And depending on the way that you invest, if you go as directly as possible and avoid certain managed funds in certain areas, it's not always more expensive than a self-managed super fund. In fact, it can be cheaper. And of course, not being the trustee can be a huge time saver, and it's simply just easier. So a lot easier to do. So self-managed super funds I think are fantastic for the right client that has the right motives, but it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all strategy, which has been used particularly for certain people in the industry where they're trying to flog apartments and do borrowings. A self-managed super fund is the only option to be able to flog off that strategy for them to sell the conflicted piece of property that they want to sell. And I think that's one of the areas that the ATO and ASIC are really quite concerned about. Over the study we've been doing through FASIA over the last 6 months, it seems to be the unspoken theme of a lot of the questioning when it comes to morals and ethics is not one size fits all, and a lot of the property apartment pushing through different entities, particularly self-managed super funds, seems to be a bit of an underlying theme. So now, just my opinion. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next week. For those that have subscribed to the channel, thank you very much. For those that haven't, it'd be great if you could. And we'll catch you next week. Thank you.